Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. For many of us in this room, I think it seems that we've been meeting like this forever, doing our best to be certain the Seabrook nuclear power plant is built and operated in the safest way possible. Now there's a definite possibility that the forever will go on much longer than we ever thought it could. For another 20 years, on top of the 40 years of the original plant operating time. We're so fortunate to have tonight two top experts in the field of nuclear power to share their knowledge, Paul Gunter and Paul Blanche, to try to put this situation into perspective with real facts and information. Also invited, as you can see over there, were representatives from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and representatives from Next Era, the owners of the plant. They're not here yet. We want to acknowledge the welcome presence of a number of officials here tonight. Barry Connell. I have a long list here. I'm not sure they're all here. So, City Councilor Barry Connell is here. City Councilor Ari Rizzo. Is there any other public officials here who might have on? Thank you. Allison Hartquist, Ward 1 Councilor. Sorry, not in the report native from the website. Sorry. Now I'd like to introduce Sandra Gavutis, Executive Director of C-10, Citizens Within a 10-Mile Radius Research and Education Foundation. Sandra is the most dedicated, knowledgeable, and articulate Executive Director we can ever have. She keeps us working hard and keeps us on task year after year. Sandra.
Thank you, Pat. I don't want to take a lot of time because we are really, really fortunate to have our two speakers tonight. C-10 does not have funding to intervene in the relicensing at Seabrook. It's not something that we can do. We're terribly concerned about this issue and the fact that they are asking for a license 20 years in advance of the expiration of their current license. We know there are many, many safety issues. So we are very, very happy that Paul Gunter and Paul Blanche are interveners. They are taking our safety issues to the licensing board on behalf of C-10, and we owe them a real debt of gratitude. We're thrilled that they're doing this for us. Many of you may not know that our mission at C-10 is to monitor radiation levels in the communities around the Seabrook nuclear power plant. We've been monitoring for 21 years since the plant went online. We have a very robust data collection right now, many, many years of data, and we're at the point now where we really would like to have it looked at to see if, and probably we suspect, that Seabrook has affected our health in this community. Again, it's a funding issue, but we do have a scientific board and wonderful people that are willing to go forth with this, so we're hoping in the near future we can get funding to take a look at this data and just see what the impact on our health has been. So I wanted to introduce, and do want to introduce, Bernadette Leonard, who is our monitoring administrator at C-10, who is just wonderful at keeping our network running. And it is a challenge because we have limited funding. The state of Massachusetts does fund us, but it's a struggle every year to get funding. We have managed to do it so far. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do every day, where our monitoring sites are, and she's just going to briefly explain it to you, and then we're going to go on with our program. Thank you.
Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. For many of us in this room, I think it seems that we've been meeting like this forever, doing our best to be certain the Seabrook nuclear power plant is built and operated in the safest way possible. Now there's a definite possibility that the forever will go on much longer than we ever thought it could. For another 20 years, on top of the 40 years of the original plant operating time. We're so fortunate to have tonight two top experts in the field of nuclear power to share their knowledge, Paul Gunter and Paul Blanche, to try to put this situation into perspective with real facts and information. Also invited, as you can see over there, were representatives from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and representatives from Next Era, the owners of the plant. They're not here yet. We want to acknowledge City Councilor Mary Connell is here. City Councilor Ari Rizzo. Is there any other public officials here who might have an Thank you. Allison Hartquist, Ward 1 Councilor. Sorry, not in the report named by site. Sorry. Now I'd like to introduce Sandra Gagudis, Executive Director of C-10, Citizens Within a 10-Mile Radius Research and Education Foundation. Sandra is the most dedicated, knowledgeable, and articulate Executive Director we can ever have. She keeps us working hard and keeps us on task year after year. Sandra.
Thank you, Pat. I don't want to take a lot of time because we are really, really fortunate to have our two speakers tonight. C-10 does not have funding to intervene in the relicensing at Seabrook. It's not something that we can do. We're terribly concerned about this issue and the fact that they are asking for a license 20 years in advance of the expiration of their current license. We know there are many, many safety issues. So we are very, very happy that Paul Gunter and Paul Blanche are interveners. They are taking our safety issues to the licensing board on behalf of C-10, and we owe them a real debt of gratitude. We're thrilled that they're doing this for us. Many of you may not know that our mission at C-10 is to monitor radiation levels in the communities around the Seabrook nuclear power plant. We've been monitoring for 21 years since the plant went online. We have a very robust data collection right now, many, many years of data, and we're at the point now where we really would like to have it looked at to see if, and probably we suspect, that Seabrook has affected our health in this community. Again, it's a funding issue, but we do have a scientific board and wonderful people that are willing to go forth with this, so we're hoping in the near future we can get funding to take a look at this data and just see what the impact on our health has been. So I wanted to introduce, and do want to introduce, Bernadette Leonard, who is our monitoring administrator at C-10, who is just wonderful at keeping our network running, and it is a challenge because we have limited funding. The state of Massachusetts does fund us, but it's a struggle every year to get funding. We have managed to do it so far. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do every day, where our monitoring sites are, and she's just going to briefly explain it to you, and then we're going to go on with our program. Thank you.
Good evening. Our monitoring program, as Sandra explained,
Speaking.
oh, can you hear me now? It's primarily focusing on airborne radiation. We do other monitoring, but primarily the airborne radiation. And it's been in existence since the power plant went online. Right now, the network has 16 monitoring sites in communities within the 10-mile radius of the power plant. Most sites are anonymous. We do have some in schools and in other businesses. Data at each site is collected 24/7, minute by minute, so we have a lot of data over the years. Our equipment monitors beta, gamma, wind speed, and wind direction. We use laptops for data loggers because they're relatively inexpensive and easy to replace. And they're also very portable. Data is uploaded to a secure internet server, which we use as a central repository. And we also have a regional mapping system, a GIS system that's available over the internet. We're under contract, as Sandra said, with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And because our data is on the internet, it is available to DPH and NEMA. It is a secure site, so not everybody can get on it. We also produce monthly graphs and reports that we submit to DPH and NEMA. have access to all the same data because we give them secure access to the central repository. And if you have a chance, before you leave, take a look at the equipment. I brought the wind monitor and a sensor, as well as the laptop with a display of the GIS map and a sample of the monitoring program. So, thank you.
Now I'm going to take a few minutes to explain how the forum will run this evening and introduce our two key speakers. The forum will run from now until about 8:50, when we do need to begin to vacate this room. Notice that you have cards on each chair for you to write questions. Please print clearly and big. At the end of the presentation by our first speaker, several C-10 staff will walk up and down the rows and collect your questions. The same procedure will be followed at the end of the second speaker's presentation. You may note, if you wish, which speaker you would like to answer the question. At the end of the presentations, I will use the cards to ask the questions of the speakers. If time is available toward the end of the forum, audience members may use a microphone to ask questions of the panelists. Please know that if your question doesn't get answered tonight, C-10 will include your concern in a planned letter to the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which will be a formal document requesting answers and responses to all our concerns and questions. Also, if you in the audience have questions that need to be directed to the NRC and therefore cannot be answered by one of our speakers tonight, those will be included in this letter also. Responses from the NRC will be posted on our website in the weeks and months following this forum. Our website is c-10.org. Two of the major issues in relicensing the nuclear power plant for another 20 years, from 2040 till 2060, are the already degrading concrete in a number of the safety-related buildings at the plant, which are suffering now from a recognized phenomenon called ASR, alkali silica reaction, in which water, especially infiltrating seawater, degrades and can weaken the concrete. This issue has caused the NRC to put a temporary stop on the relicensing procedure. The other issue is the newly discovered and acknowledged greater threat from earthquake activity. This is especially true in light of the recent Fukushima disaster in Japan. Naturally, these two issues are interrelated. Our panelists will talk about these issues. However, because we do not have an expert specifically on the complex concrete issue, C-10 has prepared a written statement in which I will now read, explicating C-10's position on the concrete issue. This is a page. In 2010, after NextEra, the owner of the nuclear power plant, applied to the NRC for a license extension to 2050, a safety significant discovery was made. Seabrook became the first confirmed instance in a U.S. nuclear plant of extensive concrete deterioration in multiple safety-related building foundations and structures, secondary to long-term groundwater infiltration. After C-10 Foundation's investigation of the NRC and NextEra's response to this unresolved safety issue, C-10 has come to the following conclusions. 1, the NRC has not been transparent in their investigation of Seabrook's extensive concrete degradation. C-10 believes that as citizens and stakeholders, we have the right to look over the shoulder of our government when our safety is at risk. We are insisting that the NRC's full investigation be made public for adequate independent review before the NRC issues Seabrook a license renewal until 2050. 2, C-10 is committed to pursuing an independent concrete expert to assess the NRC's investigation and review all data and test results. 3, C-10 has concluded that the NRC has not distinguished between two required and separate significant processes, which are A, the NRC requirement to approve a routine age management plan for Seabrook's relicense, and B, the NRC requirement for an immediate and full investigation of a safety significant plant deficiency which has placed the plant outside of their existing license basis, and that must be done before the license renewal. C-10 Foundation is insisting that the NRC make public both required processes for public and independent expert review, and that the NRC commit to a public hearing in the area on this unresolved safety issue. Now I'm going to introduce our two speakers. Paul Gunter is a lead spokesman on nuclear power hazards and security concerns. This is the gentleman next to me here. He acts as a watchdog over the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the nuclear power industry. He's a recipient of the 2008 Jane Bagley Lehman Award from the Tides Foundation for Environmental Activism for his work on nuclear power and climate change issues. He has appeared on NBC, Nightly World News, the Lehrer NewsHour, BBC World News, and Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! He was a co-founder of the Clamshell Alliance in 1976, which opposed the construction of the Seabrook nuclear power plant through nonviolent direct action. Prior to his joining his present organization, Beyond Nuclear, he served for 16 years as the director of the Reactor Watchdog Project for NEARS, the Nuclear Information and Resource Service. As an energy policy analyst, he has more than 30 years of experience. Paul Gunter has participated in the current relicensing process by filing the NEPA, which is National Environmental Policy Act, contention, and with Ray Shaddis, he wrote the petition for rulemaking, requesting that the NRC change the number of years ahead of time a nuclear power plant can be granted a license extension from 20 years to 10 years. That request was rejected. Our second speaker is Paul Blanche, who has 45 years of nuclear power expertise, was a United States Navy submarine reactor operator and instructor, has his Bachelor of Science degree in engineering, and is a registered professional engineer, was a Westinghouse Engineer of the Year, participated in the design of nuclear power plants at Millstone, Connecticut, and has been a TMI, or 3 Mile Island witness, a David Bessie nuclear plant expert witness, has testified before the U.S. Senate and the Vermont and Massachusetts legislatures on nuclear power issues, and has been employed as a consultant to, among others, Maine Yankee and Vermont Yankee plants. He has been an expert witness in the Seabrook, Pilgrim, and Vermont and Indian Point plants and their license extension hearings. Recently, he has identified numerous shortcomings in the NRC license renewal process, including the following: piping degradation, submerged cables, failure to require aging management programs for the various plant components. We'll hear from each of our speakers, and remember at the end of the first speaker, and I think they're going to tell me now who's going to go first. Write your questions as we go along. Those will be collected, then we'll go to the second speaker and do the same process.
Well, thank you all. Again, my name is Paul Gunter. I'm director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear. We're out of Tacoma Park, Maryland. And as introduced, it's like coming back to my alma mater here with the Seabrook nuclear power plant. I always like to note that there's only one unit there. And as we know that there was 2 in the planning. And then I like to also note that 4 utilities went bankrupt trying to construct this. And again, what it says is that this industry is more inclined to financial meltdown. And this has been true from day one. It continues to be the case today. What I'd like to do, first of all, is to just convey a recent story. Given that one of our topics tonight is the issue of earthquake and susceptibility and vulnerability to earthquake. And so just recently, the Beyond Nuclear and the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club and a new group called Not on Our Fault Line, which is out of Louisa, Virginia, filed an emergency enforcement petition with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission with regard to the proposed restart of the North Anna nuclear power plant, which is operated by Dominion out of Richmond, Virginia, following the August 23rd earthquake. Now, I don't know if you all felt the earthquake up here, but up and down the eastern seaboard, there was a significant impact from a 5.8 magnitude earthquake that was just 11 miles from this 2-unit pressurized water reactor in Mineral, Virginia. And, you know, it cracked the Washington Monument, which is still closed. But yesterday at 3 a.m., the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission allowed Dominion to restart the North Anna nuclear power plant, despite our efforts to request an emergency enforcement action to suspend the operation and restart until there were full public hearings with public intervention, a disclosure period, and a formal licensing process to change the license, because this earthquake exceeded the design capacity for this reactor twice the earthquake ground acceleration criteria. So it really rattled this plant. And in fact, what makes it more controversial and more egregious is that it became known that back in the 1970s, when I was out occupying the, you know, a bunch of us were involved, either engaged in the formal intervention or the nonviolent direct action to keep the Seabrook power plant coming online, in part because it too is located near an earthquake fault. While that was going on, while the police were taking us away in their paddy wagons, while we were, you know, before the licensing board making these claims, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Virginia Electric Power Company were colluding to withhold documentation, to falsify documentation to its own licensing board, its own Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, because the North Anna nuclear power plant was being constructed on an earthquake fault. And the Stone and Webster had, who was also the architect and engineer for Seabrook, had discovered that their project that they were working with was located on an earthquake fault, and Virginia Electric Power Company saw to it that their documentation was altered so that the licensing board never saw the fact that this power plant was being constructed. And not only, and this was also going on with the Atomic Energy Commission and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so the Department of Justice, a citizen activist, basically notified the Department of Justice. Her name's June Allen, the late June Allen, and we owe much a debt of gratitude to her for her work. But she got the Department of Justice engaged. And just last week, in the buildup to the restart of the North Anna nuclear power plant, this DOJ memo surfaced, miraculously, which said that the Justice Department had sought to prosecute individuals with Virginia Electric Power Company for falsification of material fact to the federal government on the siting and construction of a nuclear power plant on a seismically active area, but they could not prosecute. And the memo outlines that the reason that they could not prosecute was because Virginia Electric Power Company would have called to the witness stand the entire staff of the NRC Nuclear Reactor Regulation Division, and to point out that they had colluded in this action together. And so the DOJ concluded that they could not prosecute because their client federal agency was up to this to their eyeballs. So let's just put things into perspective. While, we were pursuing these same concerns at Seabrook, it now is revealed that the NRC was culpable in a criminal action that the Department of Justice could not prosecute. That's the backdrop for what we have going today. Nothing has changed. The NRC just issued the restart for this same power plant, and they have an archive of documentation under lock and key at the University of Virginia, which there is now a letter before the NRC Chairman Gregory Yasko calling upon the NRC to release the documentation germane to siting a nuclear power plant on an earthquake fault that has just had an unprecedented event, the first nuclear power plant in the United States to be shut down by an earthquake. And they allowed this plant to come back online, a 2-unit nuclear power plant, where the inspection of Unit 2 was the green light for both Unit 1 and Unit 2. So we didn't even get a thorough inspection. We got licensing on a conveyor belt that was basically set more to the financial interest than to the public health and safety interest. Now this, for most of us here, is not a new story. But it is a warning, particularly in the age of post-Fukushima, that we are warned, we are forewarned that accidents happen, that the unforeseen becomes the black swan, and the consequences are unforgiving. Now, I wanted to give a title to my talk tonight, so I thought I would frame it in the context of Seabrook relicensing. The answer is blowing in the wind. And I pose this answer first to begin what I hope to be answering the question of why are we looking at relicensing Seabrook 20 years before this license expires. So on June 1st, 2010, NextEra, also known as Florida Power and Light, filed a license renewal application. They did it by law. The current NRC regulation provides that an applicant can submit a license renewal application as much as 20 years in advance of the expiration date. So from 1990 to 2030, we're approximately halfway, and as a result, NextEra has filed its application. And I think that came as a shock and a concern and a clear warning that the agency is and the utility are about to set in stone a license nearly fully 20 years in advance of when it's going to be needed. And so there were several groups that first of all set about to change the rule that a license renewal request can go in 20 years in advance. It's absolutely patently absurd. I mean, just the fact that so much can happen within 20 years that it's not really rational or reasonable from an economic point of view, from a health and safety point of view, from an environmental point of view. But basically, we did, there were several groups, Friends of the Coast, the New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution, Beyond Nuclear, Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, C-10, I believe, was involved in the rulemaking as well. and we filed that rulemaking on August 18th, 2010. Now, and basically what it says is, for the following reasons, it's more reasonable even given that a utility needs the lead time to make the plans and set the wheels in motion, and to give the public its opportunity for a licensing hearing, to set, not at 20 years, but 10 years is reasonable. And so that petition was submitted on November 2nd of this year. We did get a notice from the NRC that the petition has been accepted. It's been docketed. We are expecting a Federal Register notice to come out, but they are going to defer the decision on this particular relicensing timing matter based upon an ongoing task force review of entitled Nuclear Safety in the 21st Century Post-Fukushima NRC Review. So in the context of the NRC's task force on Fukushima, they're going to take up this relicensing matter. So, but on October 20th, we filed an intervention along with, it basically broke down into the New England Coalition and Friends of the Coast filed 4 safety contentions, and New Hampshire Sierra Club, Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, and Beyond Nuclear filed a environmental contention under the National Environmental Policy Act. And basically what we've said is that the application doesn't really address the alternatives to Seabrook for the time frame of 2030 to 2050. So, we go through the application. I'll just read a couple of notes here from NextEra's application where they say, the consideration of alternative energy sources in individual license renewal reviews will consider those alternatives that are reasonable for the region, including power purchases from outside the applicant's service area. For the purpose of the environmental report, alternative generating technologies were evaluated to identify candidate technologies that would be capable of replacing Seabrook Station's nominal net base capacity of 1,245 megawatts electric during the requested relicensing period. So NextEra sets out that the region of interest for this is Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And in specific, they say wind power, due to its intermittent nature, is not suitable for baseload generation, as discussed in Section 8.3.1 of the Generic Environmental Impact Statement. And wind power systems produce power only when the wind is blowing at sufficient velocity and duration. And they go on to say, in conjunction with energy storage mechanisms, wind power might serve as a means of providing baseload power. However, current energy storage technologies are too expensive to permit wind power to serve as large baseload generator. The applicant further asserts that in the region of interest, the primary areas of good wind energy resources are the Atlantic Ocean, exposed hilltops, ridge crests, mountaintops. Offshore wind resources are abundant, and this is, they're quoting from a 2008 document, but the technology is not sufficiently demonstrated at this time. 7 megawatts of offshore wind capacity has been installed worldwide. Okay, the key word here is at this time. So we're using, NextEra is using documentation on the alternative from 2008 to project the alternative for supplanting baseload for the period 2030 to 2050. This is a scam, okay? There's no other way to put this. It is divisive. It's clearly an effort to obfuscate. In fact, what if you look at the more recent report here from the European Wind Energy Association, an ocean of opportunities harnessing Europe's largest domestic resources, says, quote, today, of 1,247 offshore wind turbines were fully grid connected with a total capacity of 3,294 megawatts in 49 wind farms spread between 9 European countries as of June 30th, 2011. So 3 times more than what NextEra has put in their application is now grid serviceable in Europe. By 2030, according to the Wind Energy Association of Europe, offshore wind production is projected to equal 80% of the projected European Union electricity demand. Okay, so this is precisely why we have the National Environmental Policy Act. It is there to provide us with the opportunity for a full and fair hearing on alternatives that are less destructive to the environment. Okay? And we are provided this by law, and this is what we are exercising. And we presented the NRC with 23 exhibits, some of which I'm going to quote to you tonight, which includes, for example, the Department of Energy National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where they conclude, quote, a baseload wind system can produce a stable, reliable output that can replace a conventional fossil or nuclear baseload plant instead of merely supplanting its output. So DOE, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, said it's feasible and reliable. Then if you go back to valuing the greenhouse gas emissions for nuclear power, a critical survey, which was a study done by Benjamin Sarvocool in 2008, what this study points out is that, you know, a typical fossil fuel plant generates 930 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. Okay, if you take something like 220 studies on nuclear power, the mean carbon output for the entire fuel cycle is about 66 grams per kilowatt hour. Okay, clearly a significant cut in the amount of carbon. But then if you put that in context of renewables, for wind energy, it's 8 grams per kilowatt hour. So clearly, there is this big savings. So part of the evaluation that we've asked be put into this formula is that we need the most effective means of reducing carbon. And in fact, when you work the formula out, even though Seabrook is already constructed, the bulk of the carbon emissions are from the fuel cycle itself, not the construction. So the mining, milling, enrichment, fuel fabrication, and waste management. These are where the carbon emissions are going to come from. So even if you figure 20 years additional operation from Seabrook, you're going to get less carbon emissions from building offshore wind in along the Atlantic coast. So, and this again is backed up by Stanford University in a document that we submitted called Supplying Baseload Power and Reducing Transmission Requirements by Interconnected Wind Farms. What they point out is that you overcome the whole issue of intermittency by providing an interconnection of wind farms up and down the Atlantic coast through offshore transmission lines. And by doing that, the wind is blowing somewhere to provide you with baseload power. And this is what the National Renewable Energy Lab has concluded. This is what Stanford University has concluded. This is what the University of Delaware and Stony Brook University, I mean, the documentation is there that this whole argument, particularly in context of 2030 to 2050 is it's a straw man. In fact, if you look at an offshore wind map for the United States, according to the National Renewable Energy Lab, it's estimated that we have 1,500 gigawatts of U.S. offshore wind potential. The deep water wind technology is already being demonstrated in Europe off the coast, as early as 2009, off the coast of Norway. But according to again, to the Department of Energy, National Renewable Energy Lab, large-scale offshore wind power in the United States, assessment, opportunities and barriers, which came out in 2010, offshore wind harvest potential of 54 to 89 gigawatts by 2030, okay? That's an important date because that's when Seabrook wants to get its license renewal. So the DOE is saying that by 2030, we could have 54 to 89 gigawatts of offshore wind. Seabrook is 1 gigawatt, basically. Offshore wind has the potential to address energy supply, the environment, and the economy. Domestic, indigenous, and inexhaustible energy supply in close proximity to urban load centers with no harmful emissions, revitalizing U.S. manufacturing sector, strengthening coastal states, and U.S. economy as a whole. Now, if you look at a map of Maine, and particularly looking into the Gulf of Maine, between the 10-mile to 50-mile offshore sector is a brilliant map of what the DOE has determined to be outstanding to superb wind class. So now this is over the horizon. So this is basically away from a lot of the islands. So we're looking at deep water wind potential here. There are memorandums of understanding with the Department of Interior, the Department of Energy. There's an Atlantic Coastal Governors Council. The University of Maine at Orono has undertaken a special project under the direction of Dr. Habib Dagher to generate 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. Again, 2030. So when Seabrook is looking to get its license renewed, the plan through these contractual arrangements, bids that are going out now, is for 5 Seabrooks to be generating, the equivalent of 5 Seabrooks to be generating power in the Gulf of Maine. In fact, if you look at the status of offshore wind technology right now, again through government figures, in the shallow waters, there's 430 gigawatts. Maine is 6.4 gigawatts of that in shallow water. And that's 30 meters, or less than 30 meters. In the what's called the transitional waters, for the U.S., it's 541 gigawatts of wind potential. That's 30 meters to 60 meters. Of that, 10.4 gigawatts in the Gulf of Maine. And as far as deep water, from 60 meters to 90 meters deep, the U.S. is looking at 1,533 gigawatts, and of that, Maine has the potential for 133 gigawatts of power. So that's the equivalent of about 130 Seabrooks right there in the Gulf of Maine. And in fact, under development right now. If and these are through deep water, both what they call buoyancy stabilized wind turbines or ballast stabilized wind turbines. And basically what it works right now is to put Bath Iron Works back to work to produce these composite materials and to begin the pilot projects. In fact, there is this stepping stone timeline at way right now where the plan is to put 5 gigawatts in the Gulf of Maine by 2030. So again, NextEra, being Florida Power and Light, they are one of the leading wind generators in the United States. So it's not like this information comes as a surprise to NextEra. And we will argue that it further makes our point that what we have at work here in this relicensing process is for NextEra to get its license renewed before this advent of offshore wind makes its way not only in Maine, but coastal New Hampshire, Massachusetts, all the way down to Delaware. And in fact, if you look at the news, you'll see that as of 2010, we have a new project at work called the Atlantic Wind Connection, which has $5 billion worth of Google Corporation investment money for a superhighway of clean energy from Virginia to Delaware, which is the first vertebrae of a backbone of high voltage direct current transmission line for interconnecting wind farms. And this is the first vertebrae for a backbone up the entire Atlantic coast coming up into Maine. So this particular vertebrae is for 756 miles of 320 kV line, and it has several companies here, including a Belgian transmission company, which has been instrumental to the EU supergrid that's under construction right now, which has a $40 billion investment from 6 European countries in the North Sea. So, I think that just in the context of what we now have in terms of post-Fukushima, the argument for moving away from this inherently dangerous technology, from this inherently expensive technology, from a technology that's afraid of competition and that needs government protection and that needs to try to secure its position in spite of the market, this is what we're up against. So we're quite concerned, though, that in fact there is more at stake here than just the imbalance within the Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensing process, which is it's designed to shake us off. It's, as many of us know that went through the whole licensing process for NRC to begin with, they just don't want to be bothered with the facts like emergency planning. These are simply matters that need to be papered over, and once the paper is there, that's enough. It doesn't matter if it makes market sense or if it really provides us with the safety margins that we need or the assurance that we can get out in the event of an accident. But what's most disturbing about the state of play right now that I wanted to just address quickly in closing is a settlement agreement that was signed on October 19th last year by the state of New Hampshire, the Attorney General's office. And effectively what the Attorney General did in the state of New Hampshire was to sign away the New Hampshire citizens' rights to addressing a whole host of aging concerns that don't have answers right now. But the state of New Hampshire, through its Attorney General, signed an agreement sight unseen. And I'll just give you a quick closing list of some of the... So the state of New Hampshire, through this agreement, which is binding for future administrations for the state of New Hampshire, by the way, the following list of issues that NextEra and New Hampshire agree have been resolved through this agreement: aging management of aging management of containment coatings, reactor coolant pressure boundary metal fatigue, aging management of buried pipes and tanks, aging management of flow accelerated corrosion, aging management of non-electrical EQ cable connections, groundwater monitoring, aging management of transformers, fuse holders, polymers, fiberglass, titanium, age management of selective leaching materials, one-time inspection program, environmental impacts of severe accidents. I mean, the list goes on. Environmental impacts from a terrorist attack on the facility. This, the New Hampshire AG said, is resolved. And what they have done is a travesty because it ties the hands contractually for future administrations. This, basically gives you the idea of just how tipped the scale is and the fight that we are up against and the stakes that are only becoming higher. So if you'd like more information about this, we'd like to direct you to our website, beyondnuclear.org, and thank you.
Amazing. You'll notice the frequency of the word aging, which I think is a key of what we're doing here tonight, talking about the aging of this plant. I mean, I was thinking an analogy is you have to have your car inspected once a year. So you have your car inspected in June, and we think it's good for a year. But in this case, they want to have a license issued 20 years ahead of time, saying that the plant's going to be safe 20 years from now until 40 years from now. Mr. Blanche. I'm going to arrange this. How
I'm almost ready. I got it.
But can I just say something about questions too? If you have questions, can our C-10 people walk around and collect those, please?
All right. That's all right. Anyway, thanks, Paul. I think we ought to nominate you for president. You were able to identify that one agency, the Department of Energy, that Mr. Perry had a little bit of trouble with. Actually, I think that agency should have been the NRC, but he couldn't remember it. But anyway, good job, Paul. I'd like everyone to keep in mind exactly what the overall mission statement of the NRC is. And if you look at their website and their homepage, it's protecting the public and the environment. And I think we'd do better if we didn't even have that agency. I mean, I formally invited the NRC to attend tonight. I contacted Dick Wynn, who's the communication spokesperson that I worked with for 4 years for next year. They didn't even respond to the invite. But as far as the NRC protecting the environment and protecting the public, they get an F-. They are not doing their job. They always side with the industry. They don't enforce the regulations. They do very little to improve safety. In fact, they're not doing anything to improve safety. What was mentioned before, I've been involved in license renewal applications for the Attorney General for the state of New York, and at the state, within that docket, I have 4 contentions related to non-functioning cables, transformers, buried pipe, and there's another issue that I can't remember, but, and plus my iPad went out. That's what Perry should have had. He should have had an iPad with him. So, yeah, on the buried pipe issue, the buried pipe issue is basically that, and it's happened at almost every nuclear power plant, we see leaking tritium in 75% of the nuclear power plants. And while I am concerned about the impact of tritium, the major impact of buried pipe is the corrosion of vital buried pipes, whether they be within concrete or whether they be in contact with the ground. There are so many issues out there, both at Seabrook, at Millstone, at Indian Point. We have the North Anna event, the seismic event, which no one was prepared for. We've had Davis, Bessie, we've had 3 Mile Island. I was an expert witness for that. We have a problem down at the plant in Florida, Bristol River, where the containment is cracked, different mechanism. But just the biggest problem, and I don't mean to downplay the significance of the problems that are being faced by Seabrook, and I'll just mention this, you can find out more information. It was in an Associated Press article last October. Indian Point, and I worked at Indian Point for almost 2 years, and I have some inside sources, and they informed me that Indian Point, while explosive mixtures, and this gets into your area, Paul, explosives and flammable materials are supposed to be excluded from nuclear power plant sites unless absolutely necessary, like hydrogen cooling from the generators and stuff like that. It was uncovered by me and an inside source that, and no one knew it, including most of the NRC people, including Bill Raymond, who's a friend of mine and senior resident here, used to be senior resident at Indian Point, that Indian Point has 3 gas lines passing within 500 feet of the containment, pressurized to 700 pounds, and these gas lines are 30 inches in diameter and 26-inch diameter. And if they release their energy over an hour, they release more energy than the bombs dropped on Japan in 1945. Brought that to the attention of the NRC, and they told me to pound sand and there's no problem. This is about the grossest example of NRC incompetence protecting the industry. And what we're seeing here at Seabrook is just one more example of how the NRC does their work to not protect the public, not protect the environment. iPad keeps going off. I keep gotta get this thing fixed or figure out how it works. Now, one of the recent problems among many that we're facing at Seabrook is a concrete problem. And my degree is in electrical engineering, and I have a lot of experience as an operator, as an instructor, designing safety-related systems. And I want to make it very clear that I am not an expert on concrete or concrete corrosion. That's left up to the scientists who are familiar with concrete, the structural engineers and civil engineers. But I had a couple conversations, one with Bill Raymond the other day and one with Rich Barkley down in Region 1. And this, I learned some new stuff, again, about the cause of the ASR, I'm not even sure what it stands, alkali silica reactions. And Bill was telling me that, and I was telling Sandy and Debbie tonight that, and they weren't aware of it, I was quite surprised, but Bill was telling me, and I could be quoted on this, and you won't deny it, that this appears to be a regional phenomenon. This is the only nuclear power plant in the United States where it's been identified. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but it's been identified as a Canadian plant and also a nuclear power plant in Japan. And according to Bill, and I think this is official information, that the real cause appears to be their selection and location of the aggregate that was used within the concrete. The aggregate are the stones that are mixed in with the concrete. And wherever they got this stone, I would assume it was locally, it was crushed stone, had some chemical that probably should not have been in there. And that chemical has been reacting with the other chemicals within the concrete and causing, again, public knowledge, this gel and whatever causes the ASR. And it is causing a degradation of the concrete. Now, everyone says, okay, what's the impact of degrading concrete at Seabrook? First of all, it relates to the permeability of the concrete to water. Most of the concrete that's located underground has a membrane, and when they backfill these trenches or up against the concrete structures, it's common that these membranes don't maintain their integrity, and the water, probably aggravated by the salinity of the water, gets behind the membrane and accelerates the ASR. Now, what can happen with this? Again, because of the permeability, we're seeing water in leakage into the cable vaults. We've seen that as public information. And the water on the cables, and it's not just in the cable vaults, but it's throughout the plant. The cables are not qualified for submergence or even for moisture. And that's one of my contentions on Indian Point, that there is no demonstrations that these cables can withstand or operate under design conditions once they've been submerged in moisture. Again, the NRC has ignored that problem. They're certainly aware of it. They've acknowledged it's totally in violation of the regulations. And I've made this promise for about 2 months, but I'm in the process of petitioning for rulemaking that the NRC and the industry must demonstrate the cable to meet the environmental requirements as defined in 10 CFR 5049. The other issue on the impact of the concrete, we saw that its strength has been reported to have decreased by 22%. We don't know how representative that number is, how many samples they've taken, the impact on the rebar, which is our large steel bars within the concrete. That appears to be a sample. I don't think anyone knows what it really means. Do we have places that where the concrete is degraded 80%, 5%? I don't think anyone has that answer. I don't think they've sampled most of the places. On the positive side, when I talked to Bill, he informed me that at this time the containment itself, which most of it is above the ground, is not impacted by ASR. And I do believe Bill is a trustworthy gentleman because there's a annulus building surrounding the containment, and water has not come in contact with that concrete at this time on the containment. Other structures, such as the intake structure, the RHR, safety-related structures that house components to cool the core, many of them are likely impacted. Now, the NRC has regulations. Again, they don't pay any attention to the regulations, but there is a requirement within the regulations, and there's probably numerous requirements that basically say that if you have a problem, you have to identify and fix that problem. And what I picked up on the web tonight is a copy of one regulation. Now, there are other regulations that the NRC won't enforce, but this is a direct quote from the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 10, Part 50, which are the regulations applicable to nuclear power plants. And this is under Appendix B, and it's called Criterion 16. And this is just one example of an absolute requirement that the NRC just looks the other way. And I'll just briefly read it to you. Measures shall be established to assure that conditions adverse to quality, we have that, such as failures, malfunctions, deficiencies, deviations, defective material and equipment, and non-conformances, and that's all of the above, are promptly identified and corrected. Well, they're still in the identification phase. Other than promptly, they don't define anything. I think that, Paul Gunter knows better than anyone else what promptly means. It's probably 20 or 25 years. In the case of significant conditions adverse to quality, which this is, measures shall assure that the cause of the condition is determined and corrective action taken to preclude repetition. The identification of significant condition adverse to quality, the cause of the condition, and the corrective action taken shall be documented and reported to the appropriate levels of management. It hasn't been done. I don't expect it to be done for years, if ever. It should be done now. We shouldn't have to wait for the license renewal. This is today's regulations that are applicable and need to be enforced. And we need to establish some dialogue, some public dialogue. If the NRC is to protect the environment and protect the public, they should be here. And I've worked with Markey's office, and I might pursue this a little bit more, but we need to have a dialogue with the NRC, and I don't mean a shouting match across the table, but have the NRC here and have some experts here on the ASR, and rather than having the NRC on a pedestal and giving them, looking down on everyone, have it across the table dialogue and interface with the public, protect the public as they're supposed to do. We need more interface with the NRC and with NextEra. I think they have an obligation to the members of the public here also. We see this time and time again. It doesn't matter which plant you go to, but I think that with a little pressure from the media, from C-10, other organizations, and maybe Congressman Markey, we could get them to encourage the NRC to have some type of dialogue with us where we can go back and forth and hopefully in a professional manner and get the answers to these questions. What is the impact? Why aren't you enforcing your regulations? Or what does this regulation mean? And so on and so forth. So in the interest of time, I want to thank everyone for their attendance, and especially Debbie and Sandy for all the work they did to organize this. And I'm going to sit down and maybe answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Paul.
Which Paul?
I don't know. I think both of you. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Of all the best speakers in the world we could get, you both named Paul. Other questions? Take your time writing them down. I have some to start with here, but when you do get them written down, people will collect them and get them up here. So most of these are not directed to either of you. One is, but I'll get to that. What specific acts should local government be taking to protect the health and safety of our community? And a second part of that question is, can local government sign on in support of an intervention?
You want to first?
Well, I think that clearly the support of C-10 is a local government effort that is, I think, really worthy. I can tell you that, sitting in Washington, D.C., that the C-10 Research and Education Foundation is held up as an example of citizens monitoring around the world, actually. So right here locally, you have an organization that is part of the vigilance that is needed. It should. I think that I would say that it should be C-50 or C-150. What Fukushima has demonstrated is that the consequence is global. This is again evidence that we learned from Chernobyl. So the vigilance is what's really most important right now. And I think what, in terms of to directly speak to the question, this is an area that government can provide local support and advocacy for this kind of work.
Yeah, as far as organizations, local governments, and so on and so forth, we've seen the Mass Attorney General certainly has intervened on the license renewal effort, and we see C-10. Where I've seen the most impact is when you get the proper media
question in terms of local government support of an intervention. Can they sign on? Well, in fact, the intervention is established right now, but there is this issue of late filed contention and the issue of standing and the fact that this community in particular is within the emergency planning zone. You know, this community clearly has standing. The contention on the concrete issue has not been filed yet. And the standard, the bar for meeting an admission of a late filed contention in a licensing proceeding is very high. There's a lot of criteria to it, and they purposefully do it to bar additional filings after the, you know, it's part of the winnowing process that always goes with these federal licensing hearings around nuclear power. But I think that that's certainly an area worth pursuing, is possibly if local government were to just keep its ear to the rail on the potential of a late filed contention on this concrete issue.
Thank you.
Just one other comment on it. The biggest problem with local governments and citizens groups like this is money. And having, you know, the technical expertise can be found. I've got some of it, Paul's got some of it, so on and so forth. But we need legal assistance. And legal assistance is not cheap. And there are some people that are good at it, like Ray Shadows, Pixie, and Tony Weissman, and, you know, other lawyers. But the lawyers don't come cheap. And you really cannot be effective without a good legal team. And it's very difficult because if you don't dot every I, cross every T, you're out of it. I don't care how big your safety issue is, but it takes money and it takes legal assistance.
Thank you. No, that's the formality of the process, the complexity of the process, as you said. And so winnowing is a purposeful winnowing. You know, they don't really want public participation very much, it would seem. Really short one. The answer is really short. Who was the Attorney General who signed the agreement? I presume they're talking about the New Hampshire Attorney General.
Excuse me, this doesn't. Let's see. Michael Delaney.
And when was that done? Remind us when that was done?
October 19th, 2010, the day before we filed. The state decided it was done.
No process, just done. It is done to support the interests of Seacoast area residents with regard to the proposed relicensing of Seabrook.
Say that again?
What have our U.S. senators done? In other words, Massachusetts senators.
For relicensing?
Yes, that's
0.
it's a quick answer, but
Why?
Probably completely complete.
The why is a difficult. I mean, it has to go. It goes to the root of the political prowess of nuclear power. That it has always been so that just as you know, charitable organizations within communities get benefit from the generosity of ratepayers' money. It's the same is true for you know, political parties. The U.S. nuclear power industry funds both sides of the aisle, and this has always been true, and it remains so.
This next question, it's actually a series of 3 questions, are directed to Paul Gunter. Who or what agency in the Massachusetts state government is overseeing nuclear plant safety? And was that agency invited tonight?
Let's see. I have to admit ignorance on the part of the state of Massachusetts, and if they have a bureau environmental protection that deals with, that has a nuclear engineering department. Some states do. For example, the state of Vermont has and the state of New Jersey, we work with state agencies that are primarily in the Department of Environmental Protection in the state. Sandy may be better able to answer this question for the state of Massachusetts.
The state of Massachusetts did have a nuclear engineer. We no longer have one. He works for Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. We would like to see that person replaced with someone that's going to work for the state of Massachusetts and not for the nuclear industry. Unfortunately, that was the case with the last nuclear engineer. Jim
Muckerhide, right.
Yeah, Jim Muckerhide.
It's like Jeopardy.
The second part of this question, I think, also addressed to you, Paul Gunter. Why would the NRC or Florida Power and Light need to care about renewables? Isn't the question, is Seabrook safe to license?
Well, there are more environmental considerations under the National Environmental Policy Act than safety. In fact, NEPA looks at issues other than safety. So in the NRC relicensing process, there are two distinct areas that the application has to meet muster. The area of safety, and as Mr. Blanche has outlined, there are contentions that have been admitted relative to safety issues for plant operations, more particularly for the age management programs for safety-related equipment, passive safety-related equipment like steel vessels, concrete containments, electrical wiring, that kind of thing. But we also have environmental considerations, and this is the area of NEPA, where since the 1970s there is this requirement that all major federal decisions need to that potentially impact the environment, the alternatives are given a full and fair hearing. Specifically, they're required to have a hard look, and that's in quotation. So what we've found with this particular application at Seabrook is that not only did they not take a hard look, but they have looked the other way. And that, I think, is the issue here, that they clearly have not met the NEPA standard.
Can I just clarify that? Is that?
Can I go to my 2 cents? I think the basic question is, why are they going nuclear, rather than the alternative? Having worked inside the fence a long time, at Indian Point, they were producing power at 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's Con Ed territory, where they're selling for 20 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour. Up here, I think they're probably selling it for 6 to 7 cents a kilowatt hour. They make a lot of money selling that power from a cheap source, because they don't have any capital carrying costs, because they bought that thing for pennies on the dollar. The basic reason is it's money. That is a money source, and it would cost them a lot of money to invest in alternative energy when they can just continue on, making 4 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour for every kilowatt hour that they sell. They can sell every one of them. I think the contract in Vermont is around 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, that's a pretty good profit when your cost is kind of 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So, in my opinion, it's money.
But let me just elaborate a little bit more. The issue is about climate change. This is clearly one of the mandates that we have to meet right now. And so we need to be able to address climate change mitigation, carbon abatement strategies in the most effective means. And again, what our intervention points out is that, in fact, renewable energy, even building a new industry, in lieu of shutting, of denying a 20-year extension to Seabrook, is a much more effective way of addressing this carbon abatement strategy. So I think that, you can't just look at energy production in the dollars and cents or risk assessment, but I think we have to have a more holistic approach. And I think this is the podium that the National Environmental Policy Act gives us.
This is an interesting point, I think, Mr. Blanche, that the reason the profitability is so high in many nuclear power plant situations is because the original owners went bankrupt. Right? And so the new owner comes in, buys the plant for pennies on the dollar, as you said, and sells the power, right? And therefore the profitability is higher.
That's correct. If one builds nuclear power plants today, estimated cost $6 to $10 billion. If you take the carrying cost on that money over 30 years, that carrying cost is going to run, I don't know, somewhere around 10, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So building a new nuclear power plant, unless it's funded by the government, is probably not competitive. But keeping these old ones running, when their carrying costs are pretty close to zero, is extremely popular. And that's why you're not seeing too many nuclear power plants being built, is because of the uncertainty of the power plants, but more so the capital cost of that investment.
The last part of this question is, can the state of New Hampshire agreement be contested in court?
Where's the lawyer? I think that it's possible that it can be investigated. I think clearly there are grounds for hearings that address the, what is the best interest to New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And I believe that it's clearly in the current political climate, getting an in-depth investigation by state hearings is questionable. But I think that there are potentially opportunities for congressional investigation because it is a federal proceeding that, I think that's an interesting question. I think clearly, first, before legal action, I think an investigation is warranted.
Officials, correct? Yes, go please.
I just wanted to add that we have an appointment with Senator Shaheen's office on Thursday morning in New Hampshire, and this is one of the issues that we're going to address to ask about this Attorney General's signing off on everything.
Give him a mic.
We're just going to take this one question from the floor and then do this way. But
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
My name is Richard Jakes, live in town. My question is related to what you just said in the Attorney General in New Hampshire. Since Massachusetts is within the 10-mile zone, does not also the state of Massachusetts have to sign off also?
Right. The Massachusetts Attorney General, Matthew Brock, has filed as an interested state in the relicensing hearing. So the state of Massachusetts does have standing in this current proceeding on all of the contentions that are currently admitted and being reviewed. So that's safety and environmental contentions. So the state of Massachusetts is engaged. and did not sign off, as the state of New Hampshire did.
Thank you. I hope I have these initials right. SEIS, Seismic Environmental Impact Statement, okay.
Supplemental.
Oh, supplemental, oh dear. Did the supplemental environmental impact statement adequately consider, number one, the degradation of the concrete, number two, the possible impact of a 6.0 earthquake?
No.
Okay.
No,
then-
and you know, this was raised at the last hearing with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission that met in Hampton Falls, was it? But, you know, what we discovered was, at least in terms of the environmental contention that was filed before the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, the NRC staff, in preparing and submitting the supplemental environmental impact statement, didn't even read the submittals. So they just sort of carried on in their own merry way. And I think it's worth noting here that the NRC Office of Inspector General has prepared an audit of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission treatment of the license renewal process. And what the OIG found was that, I believe this was a 2006 or 2007 OIG report, was that NRC staff essentially plagiarized the company environmental report. Now, that was a big embarrassment for NRC staff, that they got caught plagiarizing what was supposed to be an independent environmental impact statement. And we would have hoped that such an embarrassment would prompt change. However, at this last meeting, it was once again affirmed that they did not even bother to read the submittals on the license renewal challenges in preparing their supplemental environmental remarks.
I would encourage anyone who hasn't been to one of these hearings, when the next one comes up, try to go, because even though you may think the things that are being said here tonight are extreme, they're just what happens there. It's absolutely unbelievable, and you can witness this yourselves going to these hearings. You answered the first part, no, that this statement did not adequately consider the degradation and the possibility of the impact of the 6.0 earthquake. So this says, if not, is it possible for C-10 to initiate a lawsuit based on the inadequacy of the SEIS?
Well, the reason I say no is because the NRC has an independent process underway in this it's called 21st Century Nuclear Safety Post-Fukushima. So outside of any, as a matter of fact, there were some 25 groups in license renewal and new license proceedings around the country had combined in a joint filing to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission under the counsel of Diane Curran out of Washington, D.C., to suspend these proceedings until there was a final report from this task force. And the NRC has basically, set that aside. And, so the impact of an earthquake is being reviewed by this separate task force and was not reviewed in any of these individual environmental impact statements for any of these proceedings or any of the new licensing proceedings. So does that answer the question?
I think it does. How about this one? How safe is the Seabrook nuclear power plant from a terrorist attack?
I'm not sure I'm the best one qualified, but I can just give one instance. I have a friend who's a pilot, and a year ago last June, we
Let me just say that, we've entered a new era of terrorism that was marked by the introduction of military-grade computer virus into the Iran Bushehr nuclear power plant. And what that did was it has set into motion a new proliferation of cyber terrorism. And what is particularly worrisome about Sputnik, as it is defined, is that the virus was identified to deliberately run mechanisms to failure. And so, in that sense, we've entered into an era where we could see the equivalent of a simultaneous cyber earthquake and a digital tsunami that would effectively give us the loss of coolant accident, the station blackout, simultaneous that we saw at Fukushima, and the results are the same. And now the blueprint is out.
As a designer of safety systems in nuclear power plants and computer systems in nuclear power plants and my knowledge of operations, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Mr. Gunter on that. I know the vulnerability to cyber terrorism, and believe me, they are isolated. I've been dealing with that issue since 1980. I don't share the same concern that Paul shares on that particular one with respect to nuclear power plants. Maybe the grid, but not nuclear power plants.
Well, to respectfully respond, Paul, you and I both know, though, that Bushehr, the virus was introduced on a thumb drive.
Okay.
So even if you have an isolated system, that if you can smuggle in the virus on a thumb drive, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's the footprint of for Bushehr.
Paul, these plants are so old, they're designed with 1960 technology of relays, big switches, and there's not one piece of safety equipment that is designed and controlled by, there is not one piece of equipment in these nuclear power plants, safety equipment, that is controlled digitally through computer systems.
Yeah, well, I'll have to research that one.
Okay, talk to me about it.
Particular note to this very large picture of Seabrook on the wall, but Commissioner Merrifield went from being on the commission into Shaw Group, which is a nuclear power plant constructor, and in fact, his staff was found by the Office of Attorney General or Office of Inspector General to have been handling his communications with Shaw Group while he was still acting commissioner.
But he's a very nice gentleman.
He's from New Hampshire.
It's okay then. How about this one? Why does it take in the relicensing process, the NRC relicensing process, to uncover many operational violations and safety-related issues at Seabrook? Why aren't these problems discovered in routine NRC oversight?
Okay, having the benefit of knowing many NRC inspectors, and sometimes listening to the frustration, and this does not mean Mr. Raymond, and that it is not Mr. Raymond. The NRC inspection process is the reactor oversight process, and it's a very structured process. The regulations that are written in 10 CFR 50, which are very, very numerous, the NRC
There's also a firewall between the license renewal process and the current licensing basis, as they call it. So there's really there's no connection between violations at the plant today and relicensing this plant for another 20 years. They just don't carry over. You would think that a plant that's not in compliance with things like fire protection should be even allowed to submit a license renewal application. But again, there is this firewall that prevents the admission of violations here and today in the consideration of giving this operator another 20 years.
Nicely phrased, I want to read it anyway. Why didn't the NRC know that Seabrook had experienced 10 to 15 years of groundwater infiltration? Why wasn't this known from NRC inspections? I mean, my opinion is you just answered that, but if you'd like to say more, please do.
Well, again, groundwater infiltration by itself is not a violation of NRC requirements. If groundwater gets into your basement, it's not necessarily a major thing. If you got a sump pump, you pump it out. They didn't see any problems, with the groundwater, minor groundwater infiltration. I mean, it does come in. When you start seeing its impact on safety-related components and structures such as cables, pipes, and concrete, that's why it's now becoming an issue. As we're starting to see the impact. That impact is, the ASR, or actually the ASR was a cause of the groundwater coming in rather than, poorly designed French drain around the structure or something like that. So I can't necessarily blame the NRC or the licensee for maybe not identifying this sooner. I'm not sure what caused the identification of this. Maybe it was just too much water coming in, or someone saw concrete flaking off, or whatever. So, by the way, I was coming in tonight and I was looking at this bridge. It's in pretty bad shape if you look at it.
But it's not radioactive. At least we hope it's not. This is a question for Paul Blanche. David Lockbaum of the Union of Concerned Scientists has previously stated, parentheses, at a previous C-10 forum, close parentheses, that from what NRC officials say in private, the concrete degradation problem could be the, quote, game over, unquote, issue for Seabrook. Do you and or your sources agree?
Well, I have different feelings on this. I think it's a serious issue if it pervades throughout all those concrete structures below the containment and continues to degrade, or below ground level, continues to degrade. It could be the game over. It could be a very, very significant thing. And the other thing that we don't understand is this degradation a linear degradation? Does it increase 1% per year, or does it go from 1% in the first 5 years, 2% in the second 5 years, 10% in the third 5? We don't know all these answers yet. And Dave, respect very much to Lockbaum, and he should really brag on. It could be a showstopper, but the NRC will do everything in their power to stop the show. Believe me, they will find every excuse in the world why it's not a problem. They'll never that it's really a problem. So in my lifetime, I don't think that I'll see it as a showstopper, but maybe someone started making it out there, make it a showstopper.
Having talked with Deb Brunel about this issue a little bit, my understanding is that the information that the NRC has gotten and probably will get about the concrete degradation is not being shared with the public presently. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right.
Do you want to speak about that?
The NRC has been unwilling to share their investigation with us, and when we put enormous pressure in several departments at the NRC. We got a formal reply because we had CC'd Congressman Markey Tierney and the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts, and their reply was that Seabrook Station has contracted with an independent consultant, and the data and the testing results are the propriety of the industry. And when we contended that and said, but there will be an NRC report because you will look at the data and you will make a report. And they said, no, we will go to the plant, we will look at the data, and they own it, and you cannot get the data. So this has been something that has started to evolve in the last few years, is that whenever we've asked for very specific data and testing results and for the full investigation, again, there's this firewall between what is made public and what is then kept as the propriety of not only the industry, but also what is kept by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And the only people who can get the password for that are NRC inspectors, who do have a password to get into the closed documentation, or anyone within the NRC.
I'll get the password for you.
Thank you.
Just thinking that. We're going to stop with this last question, but this is such a good question for the public that we should do it. What can we do to put pressure on the NRC?
No, I don't want to say that.
Well, I think that's a lifetime commitment. But I think that once you're aware that, you know, the many meanings of NRC, no regulatory control, nobody really cares, never really considered. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I think that you begin to, you know, realize that, in fact, we need to be a part of a participatory process where we are engaged, where we are, where we take responsibility. And I think first and foremost, as the example of C-10, it's part of that inquiry, that research, that education process that not only happens in your community, but in your neighborhood, in your home. And I think that's part of this effort, is to make a commitment to yourself to engage this process for not only your community, but for your children's future.
Yeah, we try that, and having spent years trying to change the NRC, and I've been successful, not very successful, but, you know, I find Congress certainly, especially people like Congressman Markey, have been, you know, extremely good, and you're lucky to have Congressman Markey. He can cause changes, however, he's not necessarily perceived as a friend of industry. Senator Lieberman was very, very helpful to me when, you know, it was back in the 90s, but it takes congressional attention. But how do you get congressional attention? Getting congressional attention
Good ending.
That's a good answer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Paul Blanche.